Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-funded, crowd-driven feature where we respond to your questions on economics, foreign policy, culture, philosophy, all those things that matter to us in our life together as citizens. And today's question comes from Janine, and she says, in an article in The Walrus in February, our Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, was quoted as saying, "I'm a woman, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. 100 years ago, I would have been beaten by my husband. That's what happened to pretty much all women. Even when I was in school, teachers hit children with rulers." And Janine asks, is there historic proof of this sweeping statement regarding, it seems, a complete epidemic of wife beaters in our country 100 years ago? That is an excellent question. And that is an excellent question about a deplorable statement. So first off, no, there is no evidence that there was an epidemic of male violence against women in this country 100 years ago. And it's not even obvious that the minister was speaking about Canada. She seems to have felt that throughout the Western world, or perhaps the entire globe, men were just beating the tar out of women all the time, constantly. Nobody minded, nobody cared, blood on the kitchen table. That's what men are like. They're just beasts. And if it wasn't for the rise of modern feminism, they'd still be cracking our skulls, gouging our flesh, beating the kids and probably the dog. What a hateful thing to say about an entire gender. For one thing, I don't understand how she thinks that feminism succeeded, as it largely has, in a world that supposedly was in the grips of this patriarchal conspiracy, if it weren't for the fact that a lot of men were very concerned about women's equality and women's rights and about the mistreatment of women. And let me be clear, certainly there was domestic violence 100 years ago. And certainly there is domestic violence today. And there was and there is too much of it. And I don't just mean there's too much because any would be too much. I mean there's too much because there's a lot too much. We don't have statistics collected 100 years ago. And to be quite blunt, a lot of the statistics that we have today are not very reliable because they're often collected by government agencies that have an agenda to prove that men are brutes and women are innocent victims. There have been serious studies done, and you can go to groups like the Canadian Association for Equality for more of this kind of research that suggests that there's a lot of domestic violence that is female on male, that a surprising amount of domestic violence involves two people hitting each other, and a surprising amount that's one way is female to male. There's of course also male to female violence, but it's remarkable how many men turn up in the ER having been the victim of domestic violence. And often they're ashamed to talk about it. And it's all bad. Violence has no place in intimate relationships. I want to be very clear about that. But the notion that 100 years ago, any language that men might have used about respecting women, any talk of love, any solemn marriage vows about cherishing and so forth, were just a cover for a patriarchal reign of terror is not just vile, it's a wild invention. Can it really be supposed that most men did not love their wives? That most men did not hate seeing their wives suffer? Humans are flawed. I'm sure unkind words were exchanged. Yes, there would have been instances, even in happy marriages, where one partner or the other lost their temper, threw a plate, did something violent. There were also the far more sinister patterns of chronic violence connected with controlling issues. That stuff's not invented by any stretch of the imagination. There is much evil in the human heart, whether that heart is female or male. But let us understand that most human beings are and always have been struggling to rise above the darker impulses of their nature. And that this entire feminist notion of history as a grand noirceur of men pounding women in a kind of conspiracy and getting away with it is factually wrong as well as morally repulsive. And it doesn't help relations between the genders, including the continued struggle to advance women's rights where they need advancing, but also the need to be sensitive to men's issues, the fact that men are far more likely to drop out of school, go to jail, commit suicide, be injured or killed in workplace accidents. There are a great many issues that concern men, and as long as they're portrayed as villains, because if it happened 100 years ago, you can bet it happened 1,000 years ago and 5,000, that all of history is a reign of male fists on female faces in this vision until very, very recently. As long as you take that view, you're never going to have a compassionate response to all the problems that afflict us, including interpartner violence in homosexual relationships, where a man can be an abuser and a man can be a victim, or a woman can be an abuser and a woman can be a victim. That's what distresses me most about the minister's remarks. that in being factually inaccurate, they were also morally deficient, cold, hostile, not the sort of things we need for there to be healing in this world. So no, there is no evidence of that, and such views ought to be denounced. So, of course, should all instances of domestic violence. And let me say, of course, a lot of people think there's a very special evil to men hitting women because men are bigger and stronger, and this is cowardly and bullying and liable to produce more serious injury. But remember, women can injure men. They can throw boiling water. They can use knives. There are instances of men badly injured by their partners, female as well as male. But remember also, it is cowardly for a woman to hit a man knowing he's not going to hit her back because he's aware of his superior strength. Domestic violence is a great evil no matter what context it occurs in. And so instead of portraying men as universal perpetrators of this, what a thing to say about us. 100 years ago, we were practically all doing it. Instead of saying that, let's try to show some compassion, even in helping perpetrators break the cycle, but in sympathizing with all victims and also acknowledging the large number of people who have never done such a thing and never would do such a thing. Because it's a calumny on an entire gender to suggest that such people historically have been vanishingly small, and is probably quite small even to this day. Now, if you think Ask the Professor is worthwhile and you'd like to ask a question, here's the URL to submit one. And if you'd like to help support it financially along with all my other work, click here and make a monthly or one-time donation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.